It's all right to get started. Welcome, everybody. A reminder, Chris is our meeting host, and if you have connection issues or problems with the technology, you can contact him through the chat feature, or his phone number was made available a couple of previous times. I'd like to remind everyone, mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Have your participant and chat windows open. Use the raise hand feature if you want to contribute to the discussion, and all votes are going to be by roll call. That includes for information reports, as those are notice of motion and allows the board to modify it into a specific action if necessary without violating the bylaws. Further reminder, all motions have predetermined movers and seconders to assist with moving the meeting along, and I'll ask you to confirm those intentions as we deal with each item. And finally, I will note that today's meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the Upper Thames YouTube channel to allow public viewing of proceedings. So I'll start with the traditional territorial greeting that acknowledges that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Pawnee peoples who have long-standing relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, Munsee Delaware Nation, and Delaware Nation at Moraviantown. In the region, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of the local and regional First Nations and all of the original peoples of Turtle Island. And mentioned earlier, we've got regrets from Hugh and from Dawn. And I'd like to ask Michelle now to call the roll for the public record.
Marie Blosh.
I'm here.
Alan Dale.
Present.
Don Edmonston. Anna Hopkins.
Here.
Tony Jackson.
Here.
Sandy Levin.
Present.
Nancy Manning.
Present.
Hugh McDermott. Paul Mitchell.
Present.
Anna Marie Murray.
Present.
Brian Petrie.
Present.
Jim Reffel.
Here.
Joe Salter.
Here.
Mark Schadenberg.
Here.
Alex Westman.
Here.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to have a motion to approve the agenda. Ask Marie to move it and Ellen to second it.
Okay, so moved.
I'll second that.
Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Seeing no hands. So the motion is that the Board of Directors approve the agenda as posted. Michelle, please call the roll.
Marie Blosh.
Yes.
Alan Dale.
Yes.
Anna Hopkins.
Yes.
Tony Jackson.
Yes.
Nancy Manning.
Yes.
Paul Mitchell.
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray.
Yes.
Brian Petrie.
Yes.
Jim Reffel.
Yes.
Joe Salter. Joe? Did we lose Joe?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Mark Schadenberg.
Yes.
Alex Westman.
Yes.
Sandy Levin.
Yes. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none. Minutes of the previous meeting of Tuesday, June 23rd, 2020. We'll need a different mover because Don's not here. Anna, would you mind moving them?
I will move.
Can I ask Brian, would you second?
I will, yes.
Thank you. The motion is that the Upper Thames Board approve the Board of Directors minutes dated June 23rd. I understand there is an amendment needed to item 1 on the minutes, that we need to amend where it says Anna Marie to change it to A. Murray. So can I get a motion to amend the minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Anna. Is there a seconder?
I'll second it. It's Marie.
Thank you, Marie. Are there other amendments to the minutes? We'll get to questions about the minutes when we get to business arising. Seeing none, can I get Michelle to call the roll on the approval of the minutes as amended?
Marie Blosh,
Yes.
Alan Dale,
Yes.
Anna Hopkins,
Yes.
Tony Jackson,
Yes.
Nancy Manning,
Yes.
Paul Mitchell,
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray,
Yes.
Brian Petrie,
Yes.
Jim Reffel,
Yes.
Joe Salter, Joe?
Joe is struggling a bit. He's been in and out a few times. I thought he was going to pop up because I just thought I let him back in, but I'm not seeing him up here, so he's having trouble.
Well, if he can raise a hand, if he can't hear us, that's okay too.
Yeah, I
still
think he's
there?
right out at the moment.
All right.
Mark Schadenberg,
Yes.
Alex Westman,
Yes.
Sandy Levin.
Yes. All right. Business arising from the minutes. I understand, Paul, you had a question about a matter in the minutes.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to a question for Ian. There was 2 resolutions in the minutes regarding summaries to be sent to the municipalities on the environmental targets progress report, and then also the update of COVID financial impacts and response. And I don't believe Zora received that. So if Ian, could you give us an update on what happened with those documents?
Yeah, happy to, Paul. You're right. There were 2 resolutions for us to prepare fact sheets to circulate to municipalities. These will be developed, but they have not yet been prepared or sent. And these are my excuses. The reason for the delay in sending the financial impact information was knowing that we were going to come to today's meeting with an updated 2020 budget for your approval. And we were very aware the numbers would change significantly. And I think you've seen that from the June figures. And just as a reminder, when we talked to you in May, our financial position was we were anticipating a worst case of a $1.25 million shortfall. In June, because of actions of staff and cost containment and new contracts, we had that down to $307,000. And from the information in today's report, you'll see we've got that down to $59,000. So I was somewhat uncomfortable communicating that position, knowing the variability, but following today's meeting, assuming approval of an updated 2020 budget, that I think would be the confidence I would have to send that out. Secondly, the environmental targets progress report. I know that communication, we will absolutely send it out, but it will prompt municipal questions and I'll say even challenges about what's our plan for 2021. We see the work you've done through the progress report. How much are you going to be asking for in 2021? And originally I'd hoped to have a discussion today at today's meeting about what we're doing for targets funding in 2021. But that was deferred because of our focus on this year's budget. So my preference there is to wait until I have some guidance from you about what we're doing with targets into next year so that I can link the progress report to what we're doing next. Both these realizations came after the June meeting, and I'm happy to move quicker on them at your direction to comply with the resolution. But between the variability in the finances, and Christine tells me to still be aware of the potential for significant changes, my concern was we might add to the confusion. So at this point, if my preference is to wait for your guidance in September when we will discuss this, and then produce both those fact sheets as support for our 2021 budget plan. I think that's where they fit, and that's where the message will have the biggest effect. So that's my my long explanation of why we haven't moved on it yet. But certainly I'm happy to answer questions, or if you feel strongly we should get it done immediately, we can do that. But otherwise, I'd prefer to wait until September when we can tie it into budget. So I'll turn it back to you, Sandy, unless there's questions.
Paul, you have the floor. Are you satisfied?
So thank you very much, Ian, for that explanation. And it makes sense to me, considering how fluid the situation is and how many changes, financial and otherwise, has happened in the last 2 months. So I just, when I read the minutes, and it reminded me we'd asked for that information, and I wanted to make sure that I hadn't fallen asleep there and missed out on it being sent out. So no problem with your response.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Anything else on this or any other business arising out of the minutes? Seeing no hands. We'll
Sandy,
move
it's
on.
Anna. I do have my hand up. I'm sorry to.
I just need, just to remind people, I need the hand to show in the participant section, the little blue hand. Otherwise, I can't see everybody at the same time visually. But yeah, please go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, can you see my blue hand though? I just want to make sure things are working on my end.
There it is. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thanks for the question, Paul, and Ian, your response. I am curious to know, does the reports going to municipalities, do they go to staff or will they come to council? I'm just kind of curious as to the process.
Ian?
Yeah, typically we send it to the CAOs, but indicate it's an update for council. So our expectation is through the CAOs, it would be distributed to council.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay. Anyone else? Seeing none, we have no delegations. We'll move on to 6, business for approval. Item 6.1, reappointment of the auditors. This is just probably a kind of perfunctory motion because we have a contract with Deloitte. This would be the upcoming year is the 3rd year of their 5-year commitment to us. So I'd like to ask Tony to move the motion and Nancy to second it. That will be Nancy?
And I will second it.
Okay. We're formally confirming the appointment of Deloitte as the auditor for the authority for 2020 pursuant to the 5-year proposal which started in 2018. Are there any questions about the report? Seeing none, Michelle, could you call the roll?
Marie Blosh,
Yes.
Alan Dale,
Yes.
Anna Hopkins,
Yes.
Tony Jackson,
Yes.
Nancy Manning,
Yes.
Paul Mitchell,
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray,
Yes.
Brian Petrie,
Yes.
Jim Reffel,
Yes.
Joe Salter, Mark Schadenberg,
Yes. Yes.
Alex Westman,
Yes.
Sandy Levin.
Yes. Moving on to 6.2, which is the mid-year results and revised budget. That we approve the motion, the recommendation from staff is that we approve the 2020 revised budget as presented. projecting an operating deficit of 59,551 and projected capital spending surplus of 115,722. Can I ask Anna to move that and Paul to second before we hear from Ian and Christine?
I'll move.
And I'll second.
Thank you. Ian, you've begun to talk to this. Did you or Christine want to speak to the recommendation?
Yeah, I'll let Christine speak if she's prepared.
I'm prepared to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The managers put together another new budget, as you've read, and the deficit does not appear to be what we thought it might be. The park report that you've got in your package also confirms that activity at the parks is going great guns, and expenses are being very, very well held in check. Ian mentioned significant variability just a few minutes ago, and I will confirm that I want to see December come before we absolutely know that those expenses are kept in check. I just don't have a sense of whether we've put off doing a great deal that we still might try to do by the end of the year, and how much that those costs are figured into the budget or not. So I do believe we're going to have a deficit. I believe that maybe $60,000 is a little on the light side for a deficit, but it's certainly not going to be the $600, $800 million deficit that we were looking at a few months ago. So I'm not sure what else I can report on.
Ian, anything to add before I turn it over to the board for questions?
Yeah, questions.
I will just say the effort into improving our financial situation, I do have to give credit to staff. And, you know, in a way, I have concerns that there's this perception that we somehow magically went from over $1 million shortfall to less than 100,000, despite Christine's level of confidence in that last number. But this has not come easily. As you know, we've kept positions vacant. We've cut expenditures across the board. And I have to point at the conservation areas in particular, where, you know, much of the shortfall was projected to happen. Our staffing levels are below what they normally are and what they should be. And conversely, the public's return to the conservation areas has far exceeded what we expected. So staff in the CAs have had a tough year. They're financially, the performance is incredible, but from a HR point of view, it's been a tough struggle. So this level of effort or this approach is not sustainable beyond this year. Having said that, I have to give credit to everybody across the board who's totally bought into trying to make sure we deliver services and doing what they have to make it happen. So I do just need to give credit where credit's due. So that's it, Sandy.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you to staff who are on this call for your efforts. Paul, you have a question?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Ian and/or Chris. It's noted that the contract revenue is higher than was anticipated earlier in the spring. So I was just wondering who these contracts are with and why do we think that the revenue is higher than we thought it would be?
I'll start, but Christine, if I can have you on deck here, as if you know top of mind the sources of the revenue or of the contracts. I'll say, Paul, and to the board members, at the beginning of every year, we try and project contract revenue, but it is always a hugely uncertain number, because we don't know what contracts are going to be available. A lot of these come from senior levels of government. And, you know, this year being so unique, we probably anticipated fewer opportunities. And even when you have the opportunity, it all depends on the competition from other not-for-profits to secure those funds. So we've been, you know, part of this game. This is a key source of our revenue for decades, and we're good at it, but it doesn't mean we make assumptions about the money coming in. I think the fact we've been so successful this year was partly a bit of a surprise that as many contracts came forward or became available as they did. But I'll give credit to staff again. I think many of our senior staff have been around for a long time, have all the personal connections with key people in key agencies to make these things happen. And while I don't want to say this explicitly for the minutes, sometimes, you know, we receive calls because we have proven performance from the past. And we receive calls of, it could be year-end money or just a contract we weren't even aware of yet. Calls encouraging us to apply or just dropping money in our laps because of proven performance. So I'll say we're just pleased. There's no way we could have anticipated this, but I think again it's staff. So Christine, do you have a top of mind list where some of those contracts have come from?
I think that was
There we
actually
go.
in our June agenda, and I just looked
Yes.
at it.
Yes.
We had Environment and Climate Change Canada, 150,000 directed to phosphorus reduction. Canada Agricultural Partners, OMAFRA, 167,000 towards the Medway Creek priority. OMAFRA and Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement, 189 for the Medway Creek project priority, and 206,000 in funding from various community partners towards tree planting and community for nature projects. So I take it that those were some or all of the ones that exceeded expectation.
Yes. There are some other in conservation services as well. And some of the difference in the budget figure is due to timing of when claims go in. So yeah, there were several new grants approved, several that were not anticipated at the beginning of the year at all. But the big one, the RBC one, has made a big difference to the budget, that's for sure.
Paul, does that help?
Yes, thank you. The grants are an area that I don't know a whole lot about, so any information is useful, so thank you.
Okay, I have Marie, then Tony, then Ellen.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. And through you to Ian, I had a question about the comment that staffing is being left vacant. And could you clarify if that's seasonal staff and what's the impact on contract or permanent staff?
Sure, Marie. It is both. Certainly in the conservation areas, we didn't hire the number of seasonal staff we normally would because of budget concerns, and we weren't sure what the public response would have been to come back to work. Now, I will say in some of those cases we've tried to hire and have had difficulties bringing people in, and in some cases I'll say that's due to the CERB funding that people have received, we think. But on the permanent staff side, we had a number of vacancies, just very coincidental, where staff have left for different opportunities, different reasons. And we took advantage. I guess it was an opportunity for vacancy management, and we've left those positions vacant. Probably the biggest example I can think of is technicians to manage our flood forecasting and warning network, which is a pretty critical piece of work. There's 2 staff positions that have been left vacant. One was permanent, but to manage that, we've redeployed other staff to fill those gaps where needed. But again, it's not a permanent solution by any means, and there's been some challenges. So yes, it's both, Marie, but the permanent positions, we anticipate those being restored for 2021. Okay.
Marie,
Okay,
anything
so-
else?
yeah. No, that I was just wondering like the impact, how long that would be going on. So I guess you're looking at maybe hiring next year then, so. Okay, no, that answers the question. Thank you.
You're welcome. Tony?
On the bottom of page 5, the net cash surplus is year-to-date 5.2 million, under 5.3 million. And we revised that up to just a little over $1 million, I guess. So where's all the money going during the next few months, I guess? How is that going to be dispersed? And just explain that a little bit if you could, please.
Christine?
Yep. So the very bottom figure that you're looking at, net cash surplus or deficit, that's after depreciation, right, Tony? So while we may have an accounting deficit planned, some of our expenses are due to depreciation. So those are not paid out in cash currently. So we get to hold those funds. That forms part of our, in a retail business, it would be called a float, right? It's the cash that we hold, that we pay our suppliers with, and it just keeps rolling, for want of a better word. We have customers pay us periodically. We outlay for our payroll and for our bills, and that $1 million net cash surplus goes into the pool, goes into the kitty. So ultimately, we'll be reinvesting that. We'll be buying GICs with that, and so that's just the cash part. We are going to run a deficit this year on an accounting basis. So each year, we do usually have an excess of cash, and it's because of depreciation.
Okay. So the 4 million difference between the 5.2 and the 1.1, where's that going?
The 4 million. No, the 5 million that you're seeing on the operating statement at the moment.
That's year to date, right?
Year to date, yeah. So that will get largely spent between now and the end of the year.
With the mission cost centers, is that right, Christine?
Well, yes, with all our expenditures, because we tend to get a lot of our revenue up front in the year through our levies, and then we spend through the remainder of the year. So the 5 million won't be 5 million. The 5 million will be a deficit of 60,000. Come December.
Right. That's what I was trying to relate to. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Ellen?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And then Brian.
Just through to Ian or maybe Jennifer, the conservation areas, that's been a real remarkable turnaround. That's good to see. I'm just curious as to when we're planning on winding down the camping season, and is there any possibility it might be extended? There's lots of demand out there, so if we don't get a second wave and the weather holds, that might help us. But any sort of plans or projections on how long we can keep the camping season going and outdoor activities?
Jen Howley?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Our plan is to finish the season off as we normally would, which is the Sunday following Thanksgiving. And our facilities aren't, or our infrastructure doesn't permit us to extend that in the sense of water systems and whatnot. We do anticipate come Labor Day that we will lose some of the staff that we do have. So again, our goal is to, unless there's a second wave, our goal is to fulfill the season as normally, which would be the following Sunday after Thanksgiving in October.
Alan?
Okay, thanks.
Brian?
No, that's good, thanks.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions just for clarification and more education on my part. The first one is under the financial assets, the cash and equivalents. It should, the line says PA10 investment portfolio, and the note says represents cost, not market value. Could you explain what that means and why market value is not represented there in the figures?
Christine?
Sure. So, first issue, the current year figure is a cost figure. Last year's figure is actually a market value figure. So last year, or at the end of 2018, Deloitte didn't pick up on the fact that we were recording gains to our investment portfolio. And that's how they reported our the balance. So at that time, it had lost money, in fact, at the end of 2018. In 2019, we continued to prepare financial information, recording the market value as we went through the year. And at the end of 2019, Deloitte realized what had happened, and we had a great big correction. So now we're reporting the portfolio at the cost, which is the $4 million that we originally invested, plus whatever dividends or gains or interest have been granted to that account. Because we haven't withdrawn any money from the portfolio, that interest and dividends that it's earned now become our new cost. So that's why the number is not simply the 4 million that we put in. So it is costing us more, but with any luck, it's going up in value more, if you know what I mean.
So in short, Christine, this is an accounting, we're doing it because the accountants tell us to do it this way.
Yeah, well, they're telling us to do it, and it's been a correction. So the two figures that you see there on that statement are not totally apples to apples. They're not off by a lot, but the current year is 4.1 million. That's the cost of what we have put into the portfolio and what it is earned that we have not withdrawn, but it is not market value. Okay.
Brian, you have the floor.
My second question is the special benefiting levy that was not approved, our growth assessment funding not approved. It was originally approved in the 2020 budget for $310,000. We're seeing a zero change in the budget, even though there's nothing in there. Can I have an explanation or education on that one, please?
Sure. That item is not a levy. It was a request to the City of London for $310,000 for additional planning staff. And we submitted such an application to the city, and they did not agree that we should get the $310,000 out of their growth assessment funding.
Okay.
So we took it out of the budget.
Okay. And one more, if I may. It has to do with the contracts lines. My question revolves around how you are calculating the current budget that we're having, particularly when it comes to the federal level. The actual this year is $595,000, but you're only budgeting $541,000.
Yes.
Again, a little education on that, please.
Good point. I picked up on it when we produced the report. I believe we have National Disaster Mitigation Planning program funding that we've earned between January and March, when the program ended, that was not forecast. I think people didn't realize that they had additional funding available. So I haven't had a chance to dig into that one, but yes, the budget should be higher because the actual is higher.
And I think I'm out.
Okay. Paul, I saw your hand briefly. Did you have another question?
I was gonna ask a question about the CEWS money that we were given, and we think we're probably gonna have to pay it back. But then I saw that it was put in as a liability, so I would have to think that it's not included as revenue at this point.
Correct. We haven't called it revenue yet.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Sure. Are there any other questions before I ask for the roll to be called on the recommendation? Anna?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just as a question, I think to Christine about the West London Dyke funding, how confident are we that we will be receiving that by the end of the year? And how much money are we talking about?
Well, I think the West London Dyke is 1.4 million. Last I heard from the ministry, who funds the money from the feds, they're working very hard with Public Safety Canada to get these amounts paid out. We did get 2 payments, and then we got one of the holdbacks recently. It was only a couple $1,000s. So I think they are trying, and they've been receiving our emails, reminders, requests for a year and a half. I don't know why it's so slow. It could just be the province and the feds. They're just not communicating very well. If somebody gets distracted, it could be COVID too. Probably a little bit is that, but I mean, I think we'll get it. We have the contracts. The money was spent, the claims were in, and we've had no further questions on the claims. So if it's not paid by the end of the year, we're going to have to go to them, and we're going to have to ask them for confirmation for our auditors as well, because obviously they question how old it's getting. So.
Thank you for that. Good luck with it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Anna. Any other questions? Mark?
Yeah, through the chair too, I'm not sure who would be the best person to answer this question, but I noticed the year-to-date at the Piddock Dam is $35,685 sort of spent. The budget was $81,000, but the projected budget is $172,000. Is there something there that has to be done mechanically wise, bricks and mortar wise, that has been added to what was projected to be done at the Piddock Dam?
Christine or Chris? I'm not sure which of the two can answer.
This is in the capital page? The capital budget?
Yeah.
Okay, so the projects for each of the flood control structures that are put in the initial budget for each year have usually, but not always, been part of an application to WECI for funding at that time. We often don't know whether WECI will fund each and every one of the projects that we submit for until May, June, sometimes even later. So by the time we come to make subsequent budgets, we have a much better idea of the projects that are actually going to be funded through WECI, and therefore the ones that we can proceed with. So the difference, Piddock, the 81,000 and then the 172 is probably a reflection of the projects that we submitted and got approved for. And or got approved for and then created tenders, and now we know what they're actually going to cost. So there is, can I say, there's more variability in the capital budget than the operating budget. But I believe now this capital budget is probably dead accurate because we have so much more information on those projects now than we did back in January. It's just which projects are going to be funded or not. That's what it is.
Okay. Mark? That
No, thanks. That
satisfactory?
answers the question for sure. Thanks.
Okay. I don't see any other hands. Michelle, could you call the roll on the recommendation on the motion to approve the 2020 revised budget as presented, projected operating deficit 59,551, and projected capital spending surplus of 115,722.
Marie Bloch,
Yes.
Alan Dale,
Yes.
Anna Hopkins,
Yes.
Tony Jackson,
Yes.
Nancy Manning,
Yes.
Paul Mitchell,
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray,
Yes.
Brian Petrie.
Yes, point of order question though. Does this have to be done as in a regular budget vote that's weighted or?
Oh. That's a really good question. I didn't think so to revise a budget. Let me call up the act. Ian, I don't know if you know off the top of your head.
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian, and I'm actually anticipating that it might have to be a weighted vote. I'm going to look at Grant as well for advice on that for an approved budget because it's still a budget vote.
Grant?
I would go with the weighted vote.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Brian. It makes good sense. Michelle, do you have handy the weighted vote sheets?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So we still have a motion. I don't think we need to change the motion in any way. However, we should restart the vote in accordance with the weighted vote.
Okay. County of Oxford, Brian Petrie.
Yay.
County of Oxford, Mark Schadenberg.
Yes.
County of Oxford, Paul Mitchell.
Yes.
County of Oxford, Don Edmonston is currently absent. County of Oxford, Alan Dale.
Yes.
City of London, Anna Hopkins.
Yes.
City of London, Marie Bloch.
Yes.
City of London, Jim Reffel.
Yes.
City of London, Sandy Levin.
Yes.
Alex Westman, Lucan Bidulph.
Yes.
Alex Westman, Thames Center.
Yes.
Nancy Manning, Middlesex Center.
Yes.
Joe Salter, Stratford.
Yes.
Hugh McDermott, Perth East. Is absent. Anna Marie Murray, West Perth.
Yes.
And Tony Jackson, St. Mary's.
Yes.
Tony Jackson, Perth South.
Yes.
And Tony Jackson, South Huron.
Yes.
I believe that passes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good questions, good debate. We will move on to item 6.3, the administrative bylaw updates. The recommendation is that the board approves the recommended changes to the administrative bylaw for the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. Ian, it's your report.
Yes, and I'll give credit. Tracy and Michelle authored the report, but really the principle here, I think all conservation authorities are pursuing these.
Sorry, Ian, I'm going to interrupt you. Can I ask Anna Marie to move the recommendation and Brian to second it?
I so move.
And I so second.
Okay, sorry for the interruption, Ian. Please continue.
Yeah, not a problem. Again, all conservation authorities are pursuing these changes to their bylaws just to give us the flexibility to continue with this style of meeting if it's appropriate. So it's your call. And as Tracy and Michelle have indicated in the report, right now we're tied to declared states of emergency. That's the only, or that condition has to be met for us to continue to meet this way. So we're just trying to move ahead and make the change to the bylaw before all of our municipalities have withdrawn their states of emergency. So Tracy or Michelle, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add as far as content.
Nothing to add from Tracy.
No, nothing to add either.
Anna, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the update. We're making changes to our bylaw. I understand that. I also know that the government is looking at indoor meetings going up to 50, and I know right now there's probably, we'll probably continue doing this, but I guess this is going to Ian through you, Mr. Chair. Are you looking at how it is going to look like when we come back? And are you looking at that, or how is that going to unroll? I just want to know what to anticipate in the future here.
Ian?
Yeah, through the chair, Anna, our focus right now, and I'll provide these comments later in the meeting. Right now, our Watershed Conservation Center is still closed to the public and closed for most staff. We have some staff working there as necessary. So our attempt right now is coming up with the plans and protocols for having staff begin to return to our administration office, and that will start in late September. But still, we have restrictions for staff in like no face-to-face meetings, mask wearing. The public will still not be able to attend in the facility. So it is my hope, and certainly the board can direct us otherwise, but we need to have that transition of staff back into the building to resume something closer to normal, to get to a point where we're comfortable with the public being in the building, because our board meetings need to be public meetings. So for the near term through the fall, I think it's my position right now, we're probably going to continue with the format we have currently, and perhaps in the new year, we'd look at resuming, and whether it's full-time face-to-face meetings or we start to do a blend of meetings, but so much of that depends on what happens through the fall with infections. So I think for the senior managers, I feel like we believe these meetings are working well. And I guess personally, I don't feel the urgency to have to do face-to-face meetings again. The only pressure point we have would be around hearings, and that's a separate issue that between Tracy and Grant and others, we have to figure out if and how to proceed with those in the interim. So that's my thoughts right now, but certainly the board direction is welcome.
Anna, you have the floor.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. I'm glad to know that the meetings are going well, the ones on Zoom. But and I know going into the future, it's still unknown, but the conversation and still needs to be had as to what we can expect going back into the buildings, having public access. Be interesting to get an update on hearings as well. I would assume they're just postponed at the moment until we have a plan, but I do appreciate the update. Thank you.
Marie?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I was kind of wondering about hearings as well, if they're just postponed indefinitely. But also the other question I had is, in reading this, it sort of seems to be implied that the electronic meetings, these Zoom meetings, would be as they are right now, with everybody participating through Zoom. But is there any thought towards having a blended meetings where some people I mean, I know we've discussed it in the past, where some people would be participating electronically and others would be there in a face-to-face meeting? Because in reading this, it looked to me like it was just sort of to provide for what we're doing now, not for that kind of more blended meeting. Is that correct?
Yep.
Great question, Marie. For now, I believe our assumption is it would be as we're doing it now. The idea of a blended meeting where some of you might be in the boardroom and staff might be in the boardroom, that's an opportunity. And I think Tony had brought that up a year and a half ago. And as staff, we explored, and our constraint right now is to do a meeting in that fashion. We need to equip the boardroom with cameras and microphones, unless we're all just going to sit in the boardroom with laptops in front of us. So it would look much like we have right now. So that is something I think we have to discuss as staff again about how we would do that, because you're right. I do see that is probably the more practical outcome for the long term, is having that option for some of you to join electronically and others to be there face to face. I mean, once the whole pandemic is over. So, but recognize we don't have the infrastructure, and the last time we costed it out, it was significant for sure. But it's something we'll look at moving into the fall.
Marie?
Okay, yeah, thank you. But what about the hearings? Do we have any idea if any will be upcoming, or are they just postponed, or is there any update on that?
I'll start and I'll look to Tracy to add in. Right now, we're following advice from Conservation Ontario, which suggests that hearings are suspended for the time being. But we also have, I know we do have one outstanding pending hearing. And the longer this continues, the more uncomfortable I think we become, because legally, I think we're allowed to proceed with hearings. We're just following the advice and the practice. And the majority of authorities have deferred hearings for now, but I will say one or two have endeavored to host hearings. So Tracy, you have more insight than I do.
I would just say, similar to our administrative bylaw, there is a hearings procedures bylaw, requirement, I should say. And in that procedural document, it doesn't allow for electronic meetings. It doesn't speak to virtual meetings. Currently, Conservation Ontario is working on amendments to that procedures for all conservation authorities to then implement in their own updates. And that timeline has been said to be a draft circulated in September. So it's coming out. We're just being patient at this time, waiting for those amendments. So again, we can be conducting hearings as prescribed under the Act. And again, it's something that conservation authorities will be doing consistently.
Marie?
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that. I mean, nobody expected this, and it's all in a state of flux. So just thank you for the update.
Okay. I just want to ask Grant, just building on that question, under the state of emergency, do you see that we are required in any way, shape, or form to hold hearings?
I don't think at the moment, Sandy. I believe that what's happening is people are looking at the courts and seeing how the courts are handling these things. And then that procedure, some of that procedure may be transferred to the administrative type hearings. So I think people are literally, as we speak, working through it at the courthouse and trying to figure out how precisely to do it. So I think it still is in a state of flux, and I think that's what Conservation Ontario is working on. But there are a number of other, protocols being worked through by the ministries, specifically justice, and just to see how it all can go together and protect everybody's rights.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, can I ask Michelle to call the roll on the recommendation that's been moved and seconded that we approve the recommended changes to the administrative bylaw?
Marie Blosh,
Yes.
Alan Dale,
Yes.
Anna Hopkins,
Yes.
Tony Jackson,
Yes.
Nancy Manning,
Yes.
Paul Mitchell,
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray,
Yes.
Brian Petrie,
Yes.
Jim Reffel,
Yes.
Joe Salter,
Yes.
Mark Schadenberg,
Yes.
Alex Westman,
Yes.
Sandy Levin.
Yes. Next item is business for information, the Section 28 status report. Can I ask Jim to move it?
Yeah, so moved.
And Joe, would you second? We might have lost Joe again. Can I ask Paul to second that we receive the report?
Yeah, I'll fill in and second that.
Thank you. Are there questions from members to Tracy or other staff on the Section 28 report? Seeing none, can I ask Michelle to call the roll to receive the Section 28 report?
Marie Blosh,
Yes.
Alan Dale,
Yes.
Anna Hopkins,
Yes.
Tony Jackson,
Yes.
Nancy Manning,
Yes.
Paul Mitchell,
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray,
Yes.
Brian Petrie,
Yes.
Jim Reffel,
Yes.
Joe Salter, Mark Schadenberg,
Yes.
Alex Westman,
Yes.
Sandy Levin.
Yes. I think that was a late yes from Joe.
Yeah.
Okay. Item 7.2 is the group insurance renewal. Can I get a motion to receive the report from Mark?
Yes.
And Alex, would you be willing to second?
Yes.
Okay, Sharon, did you want to speak to the report or just respond to questions?
Just respond to questions is fine.
Okay. Are there any questions on the report? Seeing none, can I ask Michelle to call the roll to receive this report?
Marie Blosh,
Yes.
Alan Dale,
Yes.
Anna Hopkins,
Yes.
Tony Jackson,
Yes.
Nancy Manning,
Yes.
Paul Mitchell,
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray,
Yes.
Brian Petrie,
Yes.
Jim Reffel,
Yes.
Joe Salter,
Yes.
Mark Schadenberg,
Yes.
Alex Westman,
Yes.
Sandy Levin.
Yes. Next item for information is the conservation areas update. Can I get a motion? Marie, would you move receipt of the report?
I will move the report.
And Alan, would you be willing to second?
Yes.
Thank you. Jennifer, you spoke briefly to this earlier. Do you have additional information you want to share before I ask the board for questions?
I don't think so. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's, as Ian alluded to, the parks are quite busy this season, and we would have never been able to anticipate that, you know, when this all started. So I'm open for questions.
Tony.
My
Yep.
apologies. Yeah, I'm
That's okay.
unmuted now. Yeah,
Yep.
sorry. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just compliment the staff, especially at Wildwood. I've had so many positive reports on the cooperation and understanding and enthusiasm by the staff that's there, and just totally impressed with staff out there. So good to them, and pass that along to staff for sure. People, even though it's trying times, are really feeling the love. So anyway, the other thing, I guess, I just looked at the report and thought to myself, man, maybe it shouldn't open till June every year. So anyway,
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty positive results, and
Yeah.
it's one of those, May is kind of one of those shoulder months where the weathers can be unpredictable, and certainly, you know, the performance is outstanding at this point. So good work.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Tony. Any other questions? Seeing none, Michelle, could you call the roll to receive the report on the conservation areas?
Marie Blosh,
Yes.
Alan Dale,
Yes.
Anna Hopkins,
Yes.
Tony Jackson,
Yes.
Nancy Manning,
Yes.
Paul Mitchell,
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray,
Yes.
Brian Petrie,
Yes.
Jim Reffel,
Yes.
Joe Salter,
Yes.
Mark Schadenberg,
Yes.
Alex Westman,
Yes.
Sandy Levin.
Yes. Item 8 is the August 2020 FYI report. Anybody have any questions on that? My assumption is we don't need a motion to receive that. So before we move on to the item 9, the presentation, I'm assuming it wouldn't hurt to have a bit of a stretch break. So if we could reconvene at 10:45, or does the board want to continue straight through? I know I always get people who want to have a bit of a break at this time.
What if you just take 2 minutes and I'll get the presentation up, and then everybody can make sure their screens are adjusted, and then we can start. That'll just give us a minute if you just need to run, or if you need to kind of make any adjustments so you can see what I put up on screen if you want.
All right, so let's say 10:40 then. I know I have to stand up.
Sounds good.
Did we start? Sorry, I didn't know if I missed anything there when I was on the phone. So.
I believe it's 10:40, so I'm hoping everybody is back. So I would ask that you get started.
All right, fair enough. I'm just going to test my up and down. You're going to go back and forth once and make sure it. Okay, it's going down on one screen, but not on the other. Bear with me. I did test this before. Oh, it took 2 clicks for some reason. I'm not sure on that one. Okay, I just wanted to go back and forth once to make sure it's going to work before I got going. But this presentation is kind of long overdue. I think it was originally scheduled early as at some point in 2019, and then the most recent version of it that I pulled up was for March of this year. So a bit behind, and the intention, I will admit, when I first started this, because I shared it with everybody in the unit, and I had specific sections and slides for them to put in, and my intention was to bring them into the boardroom, and you could see faces with the associated sections of this, and they would speak to it and probably be a lot more interesting about some of the topics than I will be, or know more about them at the very least. So the logistics of doing that in this way is kind of makes it a little bit tricky, so you're gonna have to listen to me instead on all sections of this. So I have condensed it a little bit to kind of focus on first unit structure, and then basically examples of kind of a day in the life of, or the work that we do in the unit, because it is quite varied. Okay? If there's any questions along the way, I'll try and keep an eye out, but maybe it might be easiest if we leave them to the end. But if you're really desperate and you want to get my attention, just wave at me. So first one is a slide on unit structure, and I'm sure this will be PDF'd and included in your minutes, because there is a lot going on this, and I don't expect you to kind of decipher all the color coding and outlines of boxes and make sense of it. But I think it does tell a bit of an interesting story, because what I would like to say is there's this many people in the unit, but really what this tells you is there's kind of 15 people that participate in the unit. And if you shift that to a budget discussion, it translates into parts of people, and when you tally it up dollars and cents wise, it's like 8 full-time equivalents, roughly. So what it kind of demonstrates is that I share people with other units share people with me, and we kind of serve each other with, you know, the examples in here are technical folks would serve, say, Tracy's department when it comes to plan review, so they would be circulated to the ecologist for review, or the biologist or species at risk biologist, aquatic biologist, things like that. So I think without belaboring it too much, it does show kind of some of the way that if you were somebody that was working with us, you wouldn't necessarily know which unit somebody came from. We kind of work together across a lot of boundaries, if you will. The other piece in this is that managed within the unit is a bit of a allocated cost or a service cost center in the form of GIS. So budget-wise, again, if you would look at your, you know, the budget reports, and you would look at the watershed planning, research, and monitoring unit, GIS isn't in it. It's separate in a different one. So again, I don't need to belabor that too much. Okay. The nature of the unit, besides all this work we do where we integrate with other departments, is somewhat project-based. So pretty much everybody in this unit also wears a second hat as a fundraiser, much like in other units. So every year we start with what we've coined the phrase soft revenue, so money that needs to be found to get us through the year. And on average, that's maybe 25% of the budget. So sometimes more, sometimes less than other departments. But so you're not just, for example, using Scott as an example, as a species at risk biologist, he's also out there selling the project and finding funding for it. So what I'm going to shift to for the bulk of the presentation is just kind of highlights and examples of things that we do. And when you put a presentation like this together with a unit with as long a title as watershed planning, research, and monitoring, you'd think you could kind of pigeonhole everything into each one of those categories, but you can't. They generally overlap, and it's, you know, a scientist group that I work with that they will, you know, argue this to death. Oh, no, that's monitoring, or no, that's research, or what's the overlap between the two. So as I go through, you'll start to see some of this overlap. Previously, I think it was about 2015, we changed the name of the unit. It used to be called Research and Planning, and I just want to highlight that because with, you know, the research and planning stayed, we kind of differentiated planning part of it to watershed planning because it's different than the work that they do in environmental planning and regulations under Tracy's group. So we kind of tried to highlight that by putting the watershed planning, kind of speaking to that kind of strategic long-range planning, less day-to-day kind of regulation type planning, if you will, for lack of a better way to describe it. And then the group also found that a big part of what we do is monitoring, so we wanted to include that in the title. So that's how we ended up with the longest named unit in the authority. And just to kind of walk through some of the things that we do. So starting with these are more examples of monitoring, if you will, but much of the examples of monitoring that I'll show reflect what we're proud of to be continuous, long-term programs that have been ongoing for some more than 2 decades, some more than 6 decades. So we've established a extensive data set that's able to look at long-term issues related to activities on the ground, land use activities. So we find ourselves in a great position that we have this long period of record, and we've done a lot over the years to keep this going. So even, for example, this year, one of the examples on this slide here is the Provincial Water Quality Monitoring Network, and that's probably the longest data set that we have when it comes to water quality monitoring. And during COVID, the provincial labs that are our partners in this have closed, but we've endeavored to, although reduce, we're not doing as many samples, to keep it going, and we're using a private lab to do a reduced amount of samples just so we continue to have that period of record of data. Typically, those first two on that slide, the PWQMN and the PGMN, are long-standing partnerships with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. It's a good example of partnership and sharing, where we do the groundwork and they do the analysis, and it kind of has worked out really well. You do have hiccups along the way like this. We had in the mid-90s with changing government, there's a bit of a hiccup, and again this year, but for the most part, it works really well. Benthic Sampling is one that's we've been doing for between 20 and 25 years. So again, a long data set, and we have lots of researchers coming to us, and they say, this, you have the longest period of record for benthic data, and we want to use it in research projects and things like that. So that's kind of specific to water. Now, just in case, I left a couple slides because this was intended to be an orientation show. I suspect in the time that most of you have been here on the board, you've heard about benthic monitoring, but just in case, what is it? This is kind of where we look at the bugs that are in the bed of the water course, and they have kind of an index related to aquatic pollution and tolerance. It helps us to rate water quality. It's used in the report cards, and it reflects kind of a period of 6 to 12 months. So I just left that one in there that our aquatic biologists would put in just in case. And then just how fish inventories fit into this, you know, tied into water quality as well, kind of like an indicator of health and a way of kind of understanding by the fish that are in the water courses how our efforts to implement best management practices or do rehabilitation are taking hold. So kind of almost a first line indicator by way of the critters and fish that live in the water course, to keep it simple. So again, in the kind of shifting a little bit from, you know, just specifically water alone, natural heritage is another area of focus for research and monitoring and planning for that matter. So examples of things that you will have seen that we've done are collaborating with our municipal partners to deliver the required natural heritage studies. So we've done we've worked with each of the counties in our watershed to undertake natural heritage studies, and in some cases updated them at least once along the way. Natural heritage is also tracked for a couple of reasons. One of the main ones being our watershed report cards. So there's nobody else that is tracking these like we are. So every 5 years there's new aerial photography taken as part of a provincial initiative, and we have staff that work through and identify where we have gained and lost. And that became a real topic of discussion with our member municipalities in the last few years when we've gone out to talk about targets and budgets and the losses that we've seen. Natural heritage and the work we do around tracking these has also kind of formed the basis of one of our targets. And then work that we do to kind of help achieve those targets are identified as things like naturalization plans for lands that we own or management plans. And currently we're undertaking natural heritage enhancement strategies to kind of look at how we can bolster natural heritage numbers. So yeah, kind of a bunch of things listed on there that we do. And then shifting away a little bit from things that are core and ongoing and things that are done by staff in the unit repetitively in each kind of in cycles to stay on top of things. We undertake focused or targeted or kind of shorter term monitoring or research programs. So these are ones where we align with others, partners in the watershed or from the upper levels of government to kind of find opportunities to do work with them that meet both of our goals or strategies, if you will. So just a couple, for example, in there that we're currently involved with. So the Digman Creek ECA project required a bunch of expanded monitoring around water quality and water quantity for that matter. Chris's group is doing the quantity side. So we've got a 3-year project with them where we're doing kind of intensive water quality monitoring and quantity on the Digman Creek. Years ago, we did one in Cedar Creeks, which was spurred by the results in a report card. At that point, Cedar Creek wasn't doing so well, so it kind of merited further research, and we kind of work with them. We also have ones ongoing with, typically with the province around various projects. We're doing one right now with Agriculture Canada around water quality and pesticides. So yeah, just an example. There's some that kind of run, and we call them core monitoring. So it's going on the same places every year, and then we take on kind of more detailed studies as they come up with partners often. So that kind of makes sense. And then if there's any one thing that we can point to that is the culmination of all our monitoring efforts and state of the environment type reporting, it would be the watershed report cards that are done every 5 years. I believe we're the only conservation authority that currently has done 4 versions of these, but these have become a province-wide initiative, if you will, for most conservation authorities to undertake a form of watershed report cards. And these are, the next one will be coming up in 2022. And they're resources for all kinds of folks. And generally what we like about them and what we see is it kind of inspires action locally on a sub-watershed scale. So sometimes, the tough news that a sub-watershed has issues will motivate actions because we can't do it all out there. So you get involvement from environmental groups and municipalities and whoever else. Right? I would say the evolution of the watershed report cards is some of the things that have been identified in the strategic plan and the targets. So for the iterations of the watershed report cards, we've looked at what the conditions are, how they've changed over that period of time. Now we're kind of getting into that version where we've overlaid upon these what we want them to look like. So it takes it to that different level of kind of accountability in terms of, this is how we're going to check in on these things every 5 years, or a couple of the targets every 5 years, and see how we're doing. Just the last note on there was the Upper Thames back in the late 90s was kind of, worked with the province to lead through a provincial grant, led the development, or with Conservation Ontario and through the province, led the development of the watershed report card process. And we're still involved with the ongoing working groups to keep this going and refine it as needed. So again, like I said, some things don't defy being categorized as one thing, but I just wanted to highlight one that is specifically watershed planning, and that is the update of a water management plan, which we have recently finished, and it's kind of been a 5+ year effort, collaborating with a variety of stakeholders from municipalities, First Nations, provincial and federal ministries. It was dubbed the Thames River Clearwater Revival, and there was a significant participation and involvement and recognition of First Nations in the development of this management plan, to the point where the title is something that doesn't sound like your typical management plan, and it's been called the shared water. We refer to it as the shared waters approach. So it's related to water quantity, water quality issues, and the little little diagram on the side there is kind of just showing how there's so many components that are interrelated, but originally this wasn't drawn on the shell of a turtle, but through the work in this project, that was kind of to reflect the reference of Turtle Island from the First Nations perspective. So this plan, or shared waters approach, was completed in just this past December, and now we're in the sign-on phase, if you will, or the partner endorsement of this. So you can expect in the near future I'll come with a board report with reference to this, and there is a link to it on our website that if you wanted to read it, you could. But it will be coming. I don't anticipate our endorsement process to take as long as some of the other partners in the ministries for such, so that this could take a few months to get that kind of in place, and then we'll move into implementing, tracking implementation of this, and outreach, looking for additional partners, that kind of thing. So, again, kind of jumping around, but there's no other real way to do it. One of the other examples of a project or program area is related to species at risk, worth mentioning, and I'm sure you've all heard about it in some way or another, or read about it in your newspaper. It's been ongoing as long as I've been at the Conservation Authority, so over 23 years, and it's an internationally recognized program. It's long-term monitoring, long-term stewardship and research on some very special and threatened and endangered species in the Thames watershed that don't exist other places. So the eastern spiny softshell turtle is kind of the one you're probably most familiar with. Each year we have crews that go out and collect eggs from all these species, all these turtle species, and they're incubated and returned once they've hatched back to their location. This is one of the longest running and most successful programs of its type in the country. We get a lot of praise for this, a lot of recognition. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and there's a lot of people that really support it or help out. So from funding donations to some of the hardest working volunteers I've ever met in my life. Maybe this stems from the fact that there's not tons of opportunity as young biologists. There are students that are just starting out to gain this type of experience to come out and work really hard. Very long, hot days. Species at Risk is primarily funded through outside sources. So as I mentioned earlier, there's fundraising that goes on as part of this, because there have been questions along the way. Species at Risk, that's a bit fringe for you, but we see significant benefits to this program, whether it's just recognition or spin-off that occurs in terms of, because you have identified species at risk populations, now you're eligible for recovery funding for money to do water quality work, rehabilitation work, best management practices. So for many years, and not every year, but for many years, money for senior levels of government for BMP type work in the Clean Water Project has come because of the identification of species at risk in their habitat. So it is related. Last, and somewhat outside of the Watershed Planning and Research and Monitoring Unit, is GIS. And I just kind of put the heading at the top there, Information Systems / GIS, because it is a service cost center to all units in the authority. We have, specific to this, 3 full-time staff, and we generally have a seasonal person, contract student person typically, which we're still on track to have, but it's, again, a different year. So they're probably going to start in November when they typically start in May, but nonetheless, we'll hopefully have some help with this. These folks manage and maintain all the spatial data, undertake project work to do analysis on the data, are in charge of the folks that are gathering new data, whether it's by way of GPS units. So using Alex's unit as an example, in the ESAs, all his guys are enabled with GIS to track things such as encroachment or risk assessment, things like that. the growth of cell phones and personal devices has led to us to be able to kind of create in more recent years tools for those that are in the field collecting information just to avoid paper. And we have folks that work off tablets in the field, so you're not taking field notes, but you can actually collect your location while you're out there, collect your information, download it when you come back in to kind of create some efficiencies. And then a big part of it, the one position we have is heavily dedicated to keeping our data up to date. So there's nobody out there anymore that keeps watercourse data up to date, natural heritage data up to date. So we've taken that on, and it becomes, it was a bigger job in earlier versions when the data was way out of date. Now the air photo comes every 5 years, and it's easier to stay on top of it. But the goal is always to have the best available information up to date, and we stick to the data that's key to the things that we do. So natural heritage data, water courses, things like that. We're not updating where roads are. That's somebody else's problem, and they take care of that, and we get it from them, and they get this stuff from us. So that, I didn't even time myself to know how long it went. I tried to keep it down to 15 slides or so, so that would in theory be 15 minutes, and leave a few minutes for questions if anybody had any.
Are there any questions for Chris? One quick question, Chris. At the end, you talked about the air photos. Mm-hmm. Who actually does those, and who pays for them?
It's another example of a great collaborative. The acronym is SWOOP, so it stands for Southwestern Ortho. What's the second O? Southwestern Ontario Ortho Imagery Project, something like that. Ortho imagery being all one word. So it's hugely efficient. So I think the first version of air photo we collected was in 2019. We partnered with the Grand and the province. And if I recall, that first photo was in the neighborhood of $300,000, I believe, our cost for us. Through this Southwestern Ortho Photo Imagery Project, everybody that's interested, and so you take the landscape and you divide it up into, I think there's 6 kilometer square tiles, and everybody that wants to be in the partnership that's interested in a tile in that area, so there's overlap. So if you're in Ingersoll and you're part of the project, you want the tile. The Conservation Authority wants the tile. Union Gas wants the tile. And I'm just throwing out examples of, and they come up with a cost sharing model like that. And I believe in the last version, our cost for much higher quality color aerial photography was in the neighborhood. I think I have $11,000 in my head, but it was definitely below $15,000. So technology has changed too to create these efficiencies, but the collaborative is, it's led by the ministry, and we've been involved in the technical steering committee for it. So Phil and Terry have sat on it to help kind of design the spec when they put the plane up to gather this information. And it's done in other areas as well. So there's a Scoop, which is central on, I don't know, but we're part of Scoop. So, yeah.
Thanks very much. Any other questions for Chris? Jim, then Anna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great presentation, Chris. My question is about the Provincial Water Quality Monitoring Network and the Provincial Groundwater Monitoring Networks. Do we use a series of laboratories to do the analyses on this, or do you do some of this internally? How does that work?
Typically, they're done through a provincial lab. So we gather the samples and they'd be sent off to them. They'd be done in the, I'm going to say MOE because I forget the other acronym, MECP lab, which this year with the pressures, as I kind of hinted at, is closed to those samples. So we've kind of half the number of samples we'll take during the kind of, a 6-month period, and we're sending them to a private lab that we use for other stuff this time around, and paying for them ourselves to keep it going.
So the E. coli testing for the surface water quality, they have to be done in a timely manner. So
right, sorry. There is another collaboration with this one that we pieced together with the local health unit. So when they collect, they take extra samples, they go to the health unit, and then the other part of the sample, or just the the seconds and goes to the MOE's lab. But yeah,
So,
yeah.
Okay, so the Public Health Ontario labs do some of that.
Yes, sorry.
Great, okay. Yeah, I remember setting that up 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anna, I saw your hand earlier. Do you still have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Chris, for the presentation. I have a quick question. When environmental assessments are undertaken in certain areas, the monitoring or research that may be going on in these areas, does that inform the EA, or does the EA take on its own monitoring and research?
Yeah, and when you look at and hopefully I'm answering this question correctly, you can use Dingman Creek as an example. Yep. It was a very proactive example of an ECA or an EA, if you will, that they said to inform this process and do a bigger one, we want to have that data up front. So they were collecting it. But I will say each year, and I'll use Michelle that does Benthic and fishery sample, the year in advance is part of her work planning, sits down, this is that integration, talks to the folks in environmental planning and regulation, said, what's coming up? What are the studies that are coming up? Where would it be beneficial for me to point some of my monitoring this year so you have information leading to before project, or on the flip side, looking at after project to see how it's coming up, how things are actually panning out post project or post rehabilitation or something like that. So how formal that is, that's, yeah, we can find that out, but that is kind of one of the ways that we integrate with that department.
There is some integration, I assume, that's going on. Another quick question, if I may, Mr. Chair, about natural heritage areas. You said that you do the mapping every 5 years, the review. How does that information, or is that information shared to municipalities so they can do their updating as well? What's that relationship like?
Yeah, definitely. And Ian can even speak to this one a little bit, because I think a few years back, maybe in Oxford County, a budget presentation had one slide on natural heritage. And unfortunately, it was a bad story of natural heritage loss over a 5-year period that dominated the discussion of that meeting. And so we have endeavored, and it is part of, it's actually identified in our work plan around targets, that, if we're going to improve the situation with regards to natural heritage, we need to keep getting this information out there. So we have endeavored to take these out to municipal councils and presentations. They show up in the report cards as well, but you don't necessarily want to wait till you're presenting on those to blindside anybody with those. We've learned that. So the nature of, again, the way these things integrate, it's natural heritage data living in GIS. We can slice and dice and explain this however you like. So it can be your sub-watershed, it can be your municipality, it can be whatever defined boundary you want, that we can say this is what's happened and we have this period of record to show these changes. And there's a lot of information that goes into it to explain why it is. So sometimes the numbers will be drastic, but when you explain and say, yeah, well, one is related to something that was approved X amount of years ago, be it aggregate or development or something like that, that we get it that there's impact, but it was set in motion before you get around to collecting the data. So there's context to the data as well that can be shared. And we hand this data out left and right. So any municipality that wants it, we give it to them, we walk through it with them if they need to on how to read it. There's what the geeks refer to as metadata that travels with it, that tells you how to understand what the data means, and anybody that wants it can have it. So data is only useful, we think, if people got their hands on it or looking at it. So
thank you.
Anybody else? Jim, I assume that's from your previous question. I see a hand.
the darn moderator isn't controlling it. I should put that down.
No,
Okay. All right. Don't believe we need a motion to receive this. So I'll move on to item 10, which is other business. Ian, your concluding remarks. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we did FYI. So we're on to Chair and General Manager's concluding remarks. I don't have any. Ian?
I just want to, again, repeat a heads up that in September, I plan to bring forward some options and some recommendations around our 2021 budget. We're behind in that process. Normally we start that in June. But I'll also tell you, I think this is the greatest degree of uncertainty I've ever had about proceeding with a budget. And one of the key things is what the municipality's financial positions are. I'm making assumptions. I'll certainly be reaching out to municipalities, to CAOs for some conversations over the next few weeks. But you know, that kind of starts the conversation. We have our own financial position for 2020 to consider. We're unclear about whether the impact of the pandemic will translate into 2021. Will it affect our education program revenue, our conservation areas? So that's unclear. We still have Bill 108, and I haven't mentioned Bill 108 for a number of months, but that's the changes to our act and the changes to our levying powers. Our assumption today is that 2021 will be kind of as usual, but probably the last year that we will have the degree of power, I guess, for levying municipalities, and things will probably be very different in 2022. So I'll just give you the heads up now. We will have some staff recommendations, but I'll be looking to you for advice as well, just based on the uncertainty going into this. So that's the first thing. Secondly, as was raised earlier, we do plan to continue with board meetings being hosted virtually for the foreseeable future. Again, subject to change, and the comments today are helpful. And finally, as I mentioned before, a reminder, the Watershed Conservation Center is closed to the public, is more or less closed to staff as a workplace, but we have plans to late September return staff slowly. About a quarter of the staff will start working out of the office in late September, and we'll monitor and increase if and when appropriate. So that's just keeping you updated. Last thing, we've got a reduced schedule, but for a while there, every Friday, we're providing staff updates for staff, and I was copying you. We've slowed down the rate of publication, but I will keep sending those to you as they're produced. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions about the comments that Ian made? Because most of it's been touched on earlier. Seeing none. Can I ask that Brian move and Anna second that we move into closed session?
So moved.
I will second.
Call the roll, please, Michelle.
Marie Blosh,
Yes.
Alan Dale,
Yes.
Anna Hopkins,
Yes.
Tony Jackson,
Yes.
Nancy Manning,
Yes.
Paul Mitchell,
Yes.
Anna Marie Murray,
Yes.
Brian Petrie,
Yes.
Jim Reffel,
Yes.
Joe Salter, Joe, Mark Schadenberg,
Yes.
Alex Westman,
Yes.
Sandy Levin.
Yes. No other business? Can I get a motion to adjourn, Anna Marie?
Yes, I so move.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good meeting. Lots of good discussion. Stay safe, and we'll see you in September.